Arben and Dretten were just two of dozens of young men lured from the mountains of Albania with promises of a better life. But instead of freedom, they found themselves trapped, locked inside secret cannabis farms in the heart of Manchester, forced to work as slaves in a £10 million illegal empire hidden behind ordinary doors. Their story is the dark secret no one saw coming. Manchester is a city that thrives on contrast. Bustling streets filled with students and professionals lie just around the corner from quiet residential estates. In these calm suburbs, rows of semi-detached houses sit in silence, their windows always shuttered, their gardens overgrown. Neighbors may have passed them for years without ever seeing the people inside. These houses, to the untrained eye, appear completely normal, perhaps a little neglected, but nothing unusual in a large urban sprawl. But beneath this surface of normality, something sinister was taking root. It started with subtle signs. A strange smell drifting into nearby gardens, the kind that lingered and clung to clothes. A low hum of electricity that never seemed to stop, no matter the time of day. The same van pulling up in the early hours of the morning, its driver never staying long. Lights glowing behind curtains at odd times, sometimes bright at 3 a.m., then pitch black by noon. Locals began to talk, to wonder, but suspicion alone wasn't enough to raise alarms. People minded their own business. Besides, it was easier to dismiss it than imagine what might be happening inside. Behind the locked doors of these quiet homes, entire floors had been converted into cannabis farms. Walls stripped back, windows boarded up, floors lined with reflective sheeting. Hundreds of plants sat in long, neat rows under high-powered lamps, growing silently. The air was thick with humidity and the pungent smell of resin. Every available inch was used. Upstairs bedrooms, loft spaces, even kitchens were transformed into part of the operation. These were not the work of amateur growers. They were industrial-scale setups, meticulously designed to maximize yield and avoid detection. The people inside were rarely seen because they were never allowed out. Victims of trafficking, often with no passport and no grasp of English, were kept as prisoners. They were forced to live and sleep among the plants, cooking over hot plates, washing with cold water from buckets. The heating and lights were controlled remotely, and their every move was watched through hidden cameras. They weren't just workers, they were slaves. All of this was happening in plain sight. Dozens of homes across Manchester had become hidden factories, generating millions in illegal profits, and no one, not even the neighbors, knew the true scale of what was happening just feet away. In the mountains of northern Albania, poverty has shaped generations. Isolated villages with little access to jobs, education, or infrastructure have long struggled to survive. For many families, legitimate opportunities are scarce, and young men grow up watching relatives and neighbors turn to the black market for survival. Over the past 2 decades, organized crime networks have flourished in these forgotten parts of the country, capitalizing on desperation and turning it into a highly profitable export. One of the most powerful groups to emerge from this environment built its reputation on drug trafficking, human smuggling, and ruthless enforcement. In the early 2010s, this gang began shifting its strategy. Instead of exporting cannabis from Albania, where law enforcement was beginning to clamp down, they saw a new opportunity: the United Kingdom. In the UK, cannabis was in high demand, and prices were significantly higher than in southern Europe. Even better, British policing was fragmented across regional forces, and there was no national system that could track a mobile, fast-moving network. For these gang leaders, it was the perfect landscape for expansion. Their plan was simple but effective. Albanian operatives already embedded in the UK would rent or purchase properties under fake identities. These homes, often located in quiet residential areas, would be turned into grow sites. Meanwhile, back in Albania, recruiters targeted vulnerable young men, those struggling with debt, family pressure, or no prospects for the future. They were promised safe passage to the UK, a job, and a better life. Some knew the work would be illegal, but none of them understood what would really happen when they arrived. The journey itself was dangerous. Smuggled through a chain of traffickers across Europe, many were locked in containers, hidden in car boots, or made to walk for days through forests and across borders. By the time they arrived in Britain, most were exhausted and frightened. That fear was then exploited. They were told they owed thousands for the journey, and had to work it off, an impossible debt they could never repay. Their documents were taken, their phones destroyed, and they were moved to houses already prepared for cultivation. From remote Albanian villages to quiet British suburbs, the gang's reach had become international. But despite the distance, one thing remained the same: control. Every step, every movement, every decision was orchestrated by gang leaders who operated in the shadows, far removed from the suffering they created. The recruits were chosen carefully. Not just anyone was brought into the system. The Albanian gang had a network of local fixers, who scouted for young men desperate enough to believe anything. Most came from rural areas where work was scarce, education limited, and hope even rarer. Some were barely adults. Others had debts to loan sharks or sick family members to care for. The promise of steady work in Western Europe, construction, kitchens, warehouses, sounded like salvation. The reality was far from it. Once selected, the men were passed from handler to handler, each leg of the journey taking them deeper into the control of the gang. Few traveled directly from Albania to the UK. Instead, they were moved across multiple countries to avoid detection. Some spent weeks in safe houses in Italy or France, eating one meal a day and sleeping on cold floors. The traffickers used fear as a weapon. They told the men that police would arrest or deport them if they tried to escape. Some were shown fake legal documents, as if to prove they were already criminals the moment they stepped outside. When they finally arrived in Britain, usually through lorry containers at night, they were not welcomed or given any form of freedom. Instead, they were driven directly to cannabis houses, often in silence, the windows blacked out. The first thing that happened on arrival was the confiscation of phones and identity documents. From that point forward, they were invisible. Inside the houses, their lives were reduced to a brutal cycle. Wake up, water the plants, check the lights, trim the leaves, sleep, then repeat. Food was basic, often just rice, bread, and instant noodles. They were not allowed outside. Even fresh air was a luxury. In many cases, windows were nailed shut. Time blurred. Without clocks or calendars, many forgot what day it was. Some didn't speak English at all and couldn't ask for help even if they had the chance. If they made mistakes, overwatered plants, let mold grow, damaged equipment, they were punished. The gang's enforcers would show up without warning. Beatings were common. Threats against family members back in Albania were even more effective. The message was always clear: obey or suffer. These young men had gone searching for work. What they found was a trap with no exit. The cannabis farms hidden in Manchester's quiet suburbs were far from crude operations. These were high-tech facilities, run with precision, and designed to maximize profit while minimizing risk. Each house was part of a larger system, carefully mapped out by the gang. No detail was too small. The aim was to avoid attention, operate silently, and keep the police guessing, and for a long time, it worked. Inside the houses, every room served a purpose. The living rooms and bedrooms were stripped bare and transformed into growing spaces. Thick, reflective sheeting lined the walls to bounce light onto the plants. Rows of powerful LED lamps hung from ceilings, timed to mimic the sun's natural cycle. Industrial-strength fans kept the air moving, while temperature and humidity were controlled with smart systems. The gang didn't rely on guesswork. They used timers, meters, and automated feeds to keep conditions perfect. Even the smell, which could drift into nearby properties, was masked with carbon filters and chemical sprays. Power was essential, but drawing too much from the grid could trigger alerts. To avoid this, the gang often bypassed the mains entirely. Skilled electricians were brought in, sometimes willingly, sometimes under threat, to tamper with supply boxes and create illegal connections. This meant the houses could run at full capacity without ever showing abnormal usage. It also made the operations dangerous. Fires were a constant risk, especially when water systems leaked near exposed wires. But safety was never the priority. Profit was. To avoid drawing suspicion, the gang used tactics that mimicked normal household routines. Letters were left unopened on doorsteps to create the illusion of someone living there. Bins were sometimes put out on schedule by lookouts. In some cases, they even left lights on in unused rooms during the night to make the houses seem occupied. But the real work was happening behind locked doors and boarded windows. Security was another key part of the operation. Cameras were hidden in motion sensors, doorbells, and even birdhouses. Alerts went straight to gang members' phones, often using encrypted messaging apps. If police or unfamiliar vehicles approached, the watchers could respond immediately, either by relocating workers or shutting down the site altogether. Each house was just one link in a much larger chain. Dozens more were scattered across the region, each one identical in setup, purpose, and silence. To the outside world they were just homes. But behind the facade they were factories built on control, secrecy, and exploitation. The gang's illegal cannabis farms generated millions, but turning that cash into usable money was another challenge. To keep their operation running smoothly, they needed to hide the source of their wealth. That's where the clean fronts came in. Businesses that appeared legitimate but were actually part of a sophisticated money laundering network. Across Manchester and the surrounding areas, the gang invested in small local businesses, barber shops, car washes, takeaway restaurants, and convenience stores. Suddenly appeared under new ownership. These businesses were often cash-heavy and hard to track, making them perfect for washing dirty money. On paper, they seemed to make enough sales to cover the gang's income, but the reality was very different. Fake invoices were a common tactic. The gang created documents showing that these businesses were buying goods and services from other companies, often linked to the same network. This created a paper trail that looked legitimate to tax officials and banks. Money would move through accounts quickly, then be withdrawn as clean cash to fund more cannabis farms or personal expenses. Some businesses operated only on paper. The gang would register companies with official authorities, create bank accounts, and deposit money, but there was little or no real trade happening. These ghost businesses made it easier to move large sums without raising suspicion. Banks occasionally flagged unusual transactions, but the gang used multiple accounts and rapid transfers to avoid detection. The leaders themselves stayed hidden. They rarely visited the grow houses and instead lived in expensive homes in wealthier areas outside Manchester, such as Cheshire. Luxury cars, designer clothes, and foreign holidays were paid for with the profits from their hidden empire. Some even invested in cryptocurrencies and overseas properties to further distance themselves from their illegal activities. This complex financial network made it difficult for authorities to trace the money back to the cannabis operations. The gang's accountants and lawyers, sometimes unwitting, sometimes complicit, helped keep the trail cold. For years, this allowed the operation to expand without attracting attention. Behind the bright signs of barbershops and the steady flow of customers at takeaways, a shadow world was thriving. Every pound spent on a haircut or a meal was part of a much darker story. The money generated was not just profit, it was power, and as long as the cash flowed, the gang's grip on Manchester's cannabis trade only grew stronger. The hidden world of the cannabis farms might have remained buried forever if not for one missing teenager. A 17-year-old boy from Albania had vanished without a trace. His family back home was desperate, and a local refuge grew suspicious and decided to investigate further. What they found inside shocked them. The house was nothing like a typical family home. Behind a boarded-up window, the faint but unmistakable smell of cannabis filled the air. Officers carefully entered, taking every precaution against traps or violence. In a cramped attic space, they discovered the boy emaciated, barefoot and terrified. He had been locked away for weeks, forced to tend hundreds of plants under harsh lights with little food or rest. This rescue opened a floodgate. Interviews with the boy revealed how he and others were brought to the UK under false pretenses, then trapped in an endless cycle of forced labor. He described brutal punishments for mistakes and the constant threat of violence. Most importantly, he gave police critical details about the houses and people involved. The raid on the Longside property marked the beginning of a wider investigation. Police realized this was not an isolated incident, but part of a sprawling network across Manchester and beyond. With the boys' help, they identified several other grow houses and safe houses used to hold victims. Victims were scared to speak at first, fearing the gang's reach stretched far and wide, but the rescue gave hope that freedom was possible. News of the operation spread quickly through the local community. Families who had once ignored strange noises or smells began to come forward with information. This sudden wave of evidence gave law enforcement the momentum needed to push deeper into the heart of the gang's empire. The scale of the operation was finally exposed, and the quiet houses of Manchester would never be the same again. The rescue of the teenager was just the beginning. Greater Manchester Police assembled a specialized task force to dismantle the sprawling network of cannabis farms. They named it Operation Greenvale, a covert, coordinated effort involving detectives, intelligence officers, financial experts, and undercover agents. The goal was clear: find the gang leaders, rescue the victims, and shut down the illegal operations for good. The team worked tirelessly, analyzing phone records, bank transactions, and social media accounts linked to the suspects. Surveillance drones hovered over suspected properties, while undercover officers posed as workers and buyers to gather inside information. Each piece of evidence built a clearer picture of a highly organized and well-funded criminal enterprise. Raids followed. In rapid succession, police targeted more than 20 homes across Manchester, Salford, and Stockport. Each house was carefully planned and executed to minimize risk and ensure the safety of the victims inside. In one operation, officers found over 300 cannabis plants and several men locked inside cramped rooms. Some victims were so weak and frightened they could barely stand. The raids also uncovered detailed ledgers documenting the gang's activities, names of properties, schedules for plant watering, debt records, and contact details for middlemen. These records were invaluable for investigators, revealing the vast scope of the operation and the many people involved. It became clear that the gang had built a near-invisible empire, hidden in plain sight. Despite the arrests and raids, one figure remained elusive: the gang's elusive leader, known only by the nickname Il Padrino. No one had seen him in person, and his identity was shrouded in mystery. He was the mastermind behind the entire operation, pulling strings from the shadows. Police believed he controlled the network from outside the UK, using trusted lieutenants to manage day-to-day activities. As the investigation deepened, officers faced unexpected challenges. Victims were often too scared to testify, fearing brutal retaliation against themselves or their families back in Albania. Language barriers made communication difficult, and some victims had been so isolated they struggled to remember basic details. Still, the police pressed on, determined to bring justice. Operation Greenvale marked a turning point in the fight against modern slavery and drug trafficking in Manchester. It exposed the hidden cruelty behind the city's cannabis trade, and sent a clear message: no one was above the law. But with Il Padrino still at large, the story was far from over. The investigation took an unexpected turn, when police discovered something no one had anticipated: an underground cannabis farm hidden beneath a seemingly ordinary commercial warehouse near Manchester's city centre. The entrance was concealed by a false floor in a storage room, accessed through a narrow tunnel leading deep underground. This discovery shocked the officers involved, revealing a level of sophistication and planning that went far beyond what they had seen in suburban houses. Inside the underground space, rows upon rows of cannabis plants thrived under powerful grow lights. The air was thick with humidity and the sharp smell of resin. The conditions were carefully controlled with advanced ventilation and irrigation systems, making it a high-yield factory operating out of sight. 4 men were found working there, trapped in cramped conditions and guarded closely. Their passports and phones had been confiscated, and they were weak from long hours of forced labor. This secret farm was unlike anything the police had encountered before. It suggested the gang was evolving, moving from scattered houses to centralized hidden locations that could produce even larger quantities without drawing attention. The level of investment in the underground setup was significant, indicating the gang had deep pockets and access to skilled specialists, such as electricians and engineers, to build and maintain it. Further investigation revealed the gang had planned the operation meticulously. The warehouse had changed hands multiple times in recent months, always under false names and with cash payments to avoid tracing. Surveillance footage showed trusted members of the gang moving supplies in and out, always under the cover of darkness. The most frustrating discovery came when police learned that the gang's elusive leader, Il Padrino, had narrowly escaped the raid just days before. Officers found signs that he had been inside recently, his belongings and encrypted phones, but he vanished without a trace. It became clear he had a well-organized escape plan and access to safe houses throughout the country. This underground farm was a game-changer. It proved the gang's operation was larger and more complex than anyone had imagined. The sophistication of their methods, their ability to stay ahead of law enforcement, and the reach of their network made clear that dismantling the entire enterprise would be a monumental task. But the raid also gave investigators a crucial foothold. With new intelligence gathered from this site, they could better understand the gang's structure and financial flows. Though Il Padrino remained free, the uncovering of the underground farm was a significant blow. It exposed the gang's ambitions and sent a warning. The fight against modern slavery and drug trafficking was entering a new phase, one where criminals would use every possible advantage to stay hidden in the shadows. The arrests that followed the raids were some of the largest drug-related takedowns Manchester had seen in years. 22 suspects were taken into custody, ranging from low-level workers to mid-tier managers who coordinated the daily operations. Court cases began quickly, and after months of investigation and evidence gathering, 17 were convicted on charges including drug production, human trafficking, and modern slavery. These convictions marked a major victory for law enforcement and the local community alike. Despite the success, the fight for justice was complicated. Many victims were too scared to come forward. They feared violent reprisals, not only against themselves, but also their families back in Albania. Some returned home, quietly, disappearing from the system altogether, unwilling or unable to testify. Language barriers and trauma made communication difficult, and although support services were in place, the road to recovery was slow and uncertain. Meanwhile, the gang's higher-ups, especially the elusive leader known as Il Padrino, remained beyond reach. Despite intensive international cooperation between UK authorities and foreign law enforcement, no trace of him emerged. Rumors circulated that he had fled to Spain, where many Albanian criminal groups operate, or perhaps to another European country with less stringent extradition laws. Some believed he might still be hiding somewhere within the UK, protected by a network of loyal associates. The assets seized during the operation included luxury cars, large sums of cash, and dozens of properties linked to the gang. These were frozen or confiscated under proceeds of crime legislation, striking at the financial heart of the criminal enterprise. However, some of the money had already been moved offshore or converted into cryptocurrencies, making it much harder to recover. This showed how advanced and well-prepared the gang was in protecting their wealth. Public reaction was mixed. Many were relieved to see justice served and victims freed. Local communities felt safer, and there was hope that the end of this operation would mean fewer illegal grows and less modern slavery in the city. But some questioned whether the gang's fall was only temporary, whether new groups would rise to take their place, or if Il Padrino would rebuild from the shadows. The truth was clear. While this chapter had closed, the fight was far from over. The hidden networks that fueled Manchester's illegal cannabis trade were adaptable, secretive, and ruthless. Law enforcement's success sent a strong message. but it also highlighted the ongoing challenges in battling modern slavery and organized crime in an ever-changing world. In the months following the convictions, the scars left by the gang's operation became painfully clear. Survivors faced a difficult path to rebuild their lives. Many were haunted by memories of abuse, confinement, and betrayal. Psychological support and social services worked tirelessly to help them regain some sense of normality, but the damage ran deep. Some returned to Albania, while others stayed in the UK, determined to start anew despite the obstacles. The case sparked wider conversations about modern slavery and human trafficking in Britain. It highlighted how criminal networks exploit vulnerable people, not just in obvious places but in ordinary neighborhoods hidden in plain sight. The scale and sophistication of the operation shocked many, revealing that slavery and exploitation were not relics of the past, but ongoing crimes thriving under the radar. Law enforcement agencies began reviewing their strategies. The investigation had exposed weaknesses in communication between regional forces, delays in identifying trafficking victims, and gaps in how intelligence was shared. New protocols were introduced, improving cooperation between police, immigration, social services, and charities. The hope was to prevent similar operations from flourishing in the future and to catch victims earlier. Community groups and activists called for more support for survivors, including safe housing, education, and job training. Many stressed the importance of breaking the cycle of exploitation by addressing poverty and lack of opportunity in source countries like Albania. The gang's ability to recruit young men from vulnerable backgrounds demonstrated the global nature of the problem and the need for international cooperation. Meanwhile, Il Padrino remained at large, a shadowy figure whose true identity was still unknown. Authorities continued working with international partners to track him down, but he had seemingly vanished into the criminal underworld. His absence served as a reminder that while arrests and raids were crucial, dismantling entire networks required relentless persistence. The story of the Albanian cannabis gangs in Manchester was a dark chapter, one of cruelty, deception, and exploitation. But it also became a turning point, sparking change and awareness. It forced the city, law enforcement, and communities to confront uncomfortable truths about modern slavery.